Originally, my home and Emily, we both went to college there, and ended up in bigger metro areas for obvious reasons. But you set the book, it happens, you set the book in South Dakota.
Yes, yes.
So tell me about why you wanted to do that.
It's where I grew up. That is. I remember I was in college working on my English degree, South Dakota State University, go Jackrabbits, and I was having like a meeting with one of my professors, and he was like, I was like, I would like to write a book someday, and he looked at me and said, South Dakota has never had its William Faulkner. That's true. That is true.
Thing to say to a college student.
Yeah, and so I've always kind of carried in the back of my brain that I wanted to write something for film, for TV, a novel that's set in South Dakota because it's such a weird place and such a specific set of circumstances. It also felt to me like it has very big skies, it has very big horizons, and the transition novel, which this broadly falls into the category of, is a very internal journey, and that I wanted to have an exciting exterior you could imagine it happening against. And finally, like, if you're writing a book about a trans woman who only knows one other trans woman in the whole world, you can't set that in New York, you have to set that in Mitchell, South. You can't even really set it in Sioux Falls. Like, you have to set it in Mitchell, South Dakota, where, like, it is plausible that there are only two trans people.
Yes. Yeah, and you mentioned South Dakota being a weird place, and so you set this book right before the 2016 election.
Yeah.
And stuff, which was a very strange time in the entire country.
Arguably, it's still a very strange time.
Yes. Yeah. Feels like we had a sliding doors moment with that election. But South Dakota itself is very politically strange because just like 16 years before this, we had Tom Daschle in office.
Yeah.
And everything. And so I think a lot of people see South Dakota as this like fully red, like very dark, always been red state. But like you confront a bit of that within the novel.
Yeah, it is everywhere's politically complicated. I live in LA County, and there are bastions of deep red conservatives there. California, if you drive the 5 between LA and San Francisco, there's just like signs that are like Nancy Pelosi, go to hell, and you're like, what? They're mad about something non-specific, and you're like, I don't know why this is my business, but I'm not voting for her. I don't live in San Francisco, but it is. South Dakota is. There are parts of South Dakota that are very purple, especially like where I went to college, parts of Sioux Falls, and then a lot of it is red, but not in the way that, especially in the time the book is set. Now it's a little bit more Trump heavy, but like there is a red. It's like a very libertarian red. It's like a very much like, oh, just leave me the fuck alone.
Yes.
I'm gonna swear. And just leave me alone, let me do my own thing. And like I think there are real limitations to that philosophy, but there is room in that for queerness, for transness. And you'll like run into you'll hear stories about like old farmers who lived together for many years, and like they just loved to work the land together. And like the implication is everybody knew they were, two gay men having a relationship, but like they just sort of left it alone in their own minds. Therefore, like, they kind of have this weird plausible deniability. And what has changed is everything has gotten nationalized, which has happened all over the country. Politics is now, every little thing that happens at Oberlin College I have to care about for some reason. And, like, now everyone, like, where I grew up is, like, so worked up about trans issues especially.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, well, I heard about this one player on this one team in Oregon. And I'm like, A, that's made up, and B, like, why do you care? Like, even if it's true, why is this a thing you care about so deeply? So that has changed, but it does feel to me like that libertarian underpinning is still there.
Yeah, South Dakota is very much a leave me alone and I won't mess with you.
Yeah.
You don't mess with me.
Yeah.
Which I think lends itself a lot to this book in terms of, you say in the author's note, which comes at the end because you talk about like stuff that happens in the book, but knowing a trans person can help soften a person's view towards them, can help change their politics on that. And so with it being something that was set in 2016, it feels like there's still a little bit of hope, even though there's the dramatic irony of knowing what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And stuff. So how do you feel about that now in 2025?
I genuinely still have a lot of hope. I don't. Okay, so I think I write this in the afterword or the author's note, but like they could get rid of trans people right now. They could be like, we're gonna coerce or kill every trans person. You can't get rid of trans people. Like we're going to win this fight because we just keep getting born, and like they can't control for that. So I personally don't want to die, like that to be clear, but like it is this.
That would suck.
Yeah, this like fear of this fear that there will be some sort of overwhelming situation that erases transness entirely is not possible. There will always be a trans population. Why do I have hope now? It feels like people are waking up to the idea that we have been made a political scapegoat. This book covers the moment when it starts, accidentally, and because there's a big thing in the book is there's a bathroom bill that's basically explicitly targeted at one of the protagonists, and it fails. And that's based on a real bill in South Dakota that failed in 2016, was vetoed by the governor, then Governor Dennis Dugard. And he was a Republican, but he was a very libertarian Republican. He was like, this doesn't seem like it matters, so I'm going to veto this. It's not worth the hassle. And since then, it has gotten much worse.
Yeah.
But it's that is still there, and like, I really do feel like people are waking up to how bad it's gotten. Have they woken up in time? We'll find out. But like, it does feel like more and more people actually. Going to tell a slightly embarrassing story. I was at breakfast yesterday in Manhattan, and I was having breakfast with a very dear friend, and we were sitting there and we were like talking about stuff. We were talking about the book, we were talking about the show, we were talking about all sorts of things, and I'm sure transness came up many times. And we were about to pay, and the waitress comes up and says, "I'm sorry, I don't know how to tell you this, but that woman there paid." And we're like, "Oh, that's nice." She had just left. She was an older woman. She was like, "Yeah, she said she's from small town Indiana, and she wants you to know they're not all like that." And I was like, "Oh, okay." And so there's people like that woman who are like becoming aware, and I think are hopefully going to read something like this book or watch a movie or something and get that sort of level of political consciousness raised, and hopefully that will help, and I'll get more free breakfasts. I really was like, "Oh, she's read Woodworking." I was like, "Oh, she's a Yellow Jackets fan." She read the Community
No. She just clocked you all and was like,
"Wonderful, thank you, thank you, woman from Indiana."
So, the title of the book, do you want to explain what woodworking is?
Yeah, woodworking is an idea that I encountered on Reddit, basically, in the trans community. In the 70s and 80s especially, trans women, trans men would transition and then disappear into the woodwork. It was how it was, that's why it's called woodworking. And the idea is like they would cut off their old lives. They would be like, "I no longer talk to my family, I no longer talk to any friends, I have totally cut ties with that." My first encounter with this was a woman came to, very early in my transition, a woman came to a support group I was at, and she was in probably her 50s, and she started weeping and was like, "I grew up in Colombia, I moved to New York, I transitioned, and I have not told anyone I'm trans in like 30 years. Her doctor knew, and that was it." And I was like, she and I are in the same boat. She wants community, I want community, but we have very different perspectives on it. And that is kind of what led me to the idea of woodworking, because it felt it's simultaneously alluring to be able to go through the world and have nobody perceive you as other, but also it's alienating because you have to cut off a part of yourself. You have to like cleave a limb off of yourself. And like the essential thing about being queer is that you're doing both of those things at the same time, all of the time, because like nobody can immediately see like your gender or sexuality, any of that, when they look at you. But you know, like there is a level of, well, how open am I going to be? How much am I going to? And some people are very good at being very open, and some people like me often like to be a little bit, I don't know about that. But like it is, especially since I've had a kid, people just read me as like a mom. And if I'm out with my kid, I never get clocked. And it's interesting. It's interesting to just be a mom and just have everyone be like, what a great kid. And then they don't really see me either because they're just looking at my child. But whatever.
Well, you do have a very cute kid.
She's so cute. So I would give you her Instagram thing, but then my wife would be like, why are all these people trying to follow her?
If you do look, she did post a video of the kid yesterday.
Yeah.
So
On my Instagram, you can see my child saying, "Mama's book."
And that's interesting to me because one of the things that you confront in the book is this idea of womanhood being partially a role that people are playing. That you disappear sort of into the role of mom when you're out with your kid and people don't put you in the category of trans woman and stuff. So I guess I'm thinking too about how like for both of us we're like I'm non-binary trans and so like I can't woodwork because my gender automatically defies any sort of categorization, whereas you are more on the binary side.
How could you tell?
And so woodworking is not only impossible for me, but it's also sort of an impossible thing for you as well, being out so publicly as a writer.
And that's like a thing that I think informed my interest in this, is like one Google of me immediately gives away my whole deal. And like, I find that very hard to bear sometimes. Just because that's the case of being a public figure. You know, that's just how it is if you're me or if you're Taylor Swift. We're very similar. But it is like, it is hard and it is like weird to be like, oh yeah, you know, anybody could Google me and decide what they know about me just from reading my bio there. And I do think like woodworking is like a term that has fallen out of favor. Like people don't really do it anymore. Now with the advent of the internet, it's so much harder. But like I talked to a number of women who had done it or were what we call deep stealth, which is like a few people know, but for the most part in the public, they're not living that life. And they all had this like incredibly isolated experience of their lives. And like some of them were starting to come out because that was when it seemed like transness was being more accepted. And they all were like, they had these immense emotional burdens from having done it for that long. And that was interesting to me just as like an impetus for Abigail, the teenager in the book, is like, she started transition at 16. So, you know, she passes whatever, however we want to talk about that. And her whole dream is to like move to Chicago and just like disappear. And like, I was like, what happens if you do that? And that was like the impetus for this. But also the impetus was Erica, who is the other character and has not yet transitioned, is woodworking into manhood. She's just like moving through the world as a man and people are like, look at you seem steady. And the second she starts being like, actually, they're like, you don't seem steady anymore. I'm not sure how I feel about you. So like, I was interested in, I did the annoying novelist thing. I sat down and wrote how every character in the book was woodworking, and that all the cis people are too. We're all hiding some piece of ourselves to get through life. We all keep things out of view when we're at work or when we're with our family. Nobody gets all of us. We don't even get all of us. So we're all woodworking some piece of ourselves all the time. So go home and do an inventory of your emotions tonight.
Yeah, that actually, I had that written down as a follow-up of there's this idea in trans theory my background is in women's studies and gender studies, and stuff, and so I write nonfiction on that, and I felt like your book was a good, like, exploration of that from the fiction side. But there's this idea that nobody passes.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing as passing.
Right.
Insofar as gender is something that we've constructed and we're all just sort of playing at it.
Yeah. I think one of the things that scares a lot of cis people about trans people is that we are saying gender is a construct and we're all trapped by it and we're all negotiating that. And people don't like to hear that because it's one of the, I noticed it in my kid. My kid is 2 and she's having the parts of her brain that are girl turn on. And like, there's so much pressure to be this thing or that thing. And you know, she'll be like, she really loves Spider-Man. And I'm like, when does the part come where the people are like, little girls don't like Spider-Man? And like, you know, or even don't even say that. They just kind of like gradually nudge her toward other things. Or I see it happening with her peers. They're all 2, but they're like, let's play princesses. And it's like, when does this like happen? And it's all, I think people don't like to think about that because it's so pervasive. And it happens from the second you're born, which is scary and hard and weird. Tell me the question again. I started talking about my kid. Yeah. No, there's a section in the book where Abigail, and I stole this from Reddit. I literally stole this from Reddit. Abigail like is telling Erica nobody passes. And the idea is that like if you really look at any person in this audience and you will see something about them that does not fit what their gender is presented as to the world. But the author Julia Serrano has a book called Sexed Up, where she talks about how we see a person, we make a guess about them. We sort them into a bucket. I have done enough things in how I present myself, in my transition, that like when people see me, invariably they sort me into woman bucket, especially when I have a kid, because they're like, Mom. And that is, you know, a thing that trans people are often directly going against, which is what makes people uneasy about it. But yeah, if you go and just like stare at someone, don't do this. But like you know, there's people online who are like, we're gonna transvestigate Taylor Swift. We're gonna transvestigate Travis Kelce. We're gonna transvestigate all these people. And you can look at anybody long enough and be like, they're not cis. Here's why, and here's why, and here's why. And like, as a trans person, that's terrifying. I don't like the thought of that. But the fact that you can do it with anybody on the planet is should make us realize that gender is like really fucking made up.
Yeah, I had, conveniently, just last night, I go to a cribbage tournament on the first Tuesday of every month, because I'm an old man. And a bunch of the other people who participate are these straight, cis people. And every so often, there's a straight guy who shows up. It's almost never the women, it's the guys. And they will just stare at me like, I don't know what to make of that person. And stuff, which is really interesting to me, because like that's sort of what I'm going for.
Yeah. You want to confuse old straight men. I get it.
Yeah. It's really fun. But like, when talking with my sister-in-law about that sort of stuff, she's like, if people did that to me, I would be like so upset.
Yeah, people don't like being looked at.
Yeah.
And I think that some of that is very natural. I don't think anybody likes being looked at, you know. But it is like, it does freak some people out a lot.
Yeah.
To be, and that's drives a lot of worry and fear, especially parents dealing with their kids, I think.
Yeah.
They get like, well, what if people think you're different? It's like, you know, that's my life, Mom.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's one of the ways that's an inroad sort of in talking to cis people about transition. But one thing that I really liked about this book is that it's not really about cis people at all. It's about how trans people are thinking and how they're dealing with the world outside of who they are.
I do want to point out this book has an excellent cisgender representation. I ran it by a bunch of cis people and I was like, if I got anything wrong, does that mean that? And they did, and I listened and I corrected. So
You needed cis sensitivity?
I wanted it to be when I sent it to my agent, I said that my target audience was a lady who reads a book on an airplane.
Ooh.
So I wanted it to be a book that was approachable to as wide an audience as possible while also not compromising on this is going to be in a trans point of view throughout. You're in Erica or Abigail's eyes throughout. But I really did want to make sure that like all of the characters had arcs, all of the characters had journeys. The majority of people in the book are cis because strangely the majority of people in the world are cis. But like it was important to me that we saw them through Erica and Abigail's eyes, and like if Erica's looking at her ex-wife, whom she ill-advisedly starts crushing on again, that be different from Abigail looking at her and Abigail being like, who is this woman? I don't understand what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And like because I'm fascinated by how people see other people, and so it was interesting to have these two trans women seeing the other people in their lives and like perceiving them. I think in the way that like cis people perceive us, maybe not that far. Like I maybe didn't actually pull that off. I'm writing a check my book doesn't cash, but
I think it does, as somebody who read it. But that also brings up you jump between points of view in
yes.
the book,
Mm-hmm.
and you use pronouns and typography in a way that's very effective. If you have a copy and you've looked at it, there are sections where the dead name of Erica is it's blurred out,
Yeah,
basically,
on the literal first
with
page.
a little gray box. You told me there was an interesting discussion with your editors about
We
that.
had like a long argument about it. Not in the sense that like they wanted me to reveal the dead name. In the very first draft, the dead name was there throughout because it just made no sense that like people would never refer to Erica by what they thought her name was. But two things happened because of that. One was that it just created a weird like fascination with that, and then also it kind of didn't capture Erica's emotional experience, which is she's in a space where that name increasingly means nothing to her, but she has to hear it a lot, so it's like grayed over with fog. And I think a lot of transition novels, transition stories, sort of posit in a before and an after. Here's dead name, here's Erica. They are two separate characters effectively, and I wanted to get away from that as much as possible. So we came up with like, originally in draft 2 from then on it was redacted. It was like, there was like a black bar like in a government document. And my publisher and I kind of went back and forth on this. They wanted it to be a dash, but I liked the way that the black bar felt like, an early reader of the book said it felt like a bullet. And I liked that sense of like, I could play with that as a visual element. And they were like, yeah, but it's too jarring. It breaks up the experience too much for the reader. So it ended up being like having a conversation about like cinematography in a weird way. We ended up lightening it up. It's a gray bar now, so it's a little bit more like fog. It reads a little bit easier, but you still get that visual. It's an abruptness to it. So that's a very long story about typography.
Yeah, no, I like that. Those are the choices that you end up having to make as...
They didn't let me pick the font, so...
Yeah. And see, when they hand me a draft, it's like, oh, you picked a good font, good. But you also, I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to mention that you don't do that for Abigail's.
No, yeah, Abigail doesn't. Nobody calls her by her dead name. You know, there's one point in the book where someone does, and it is blurred out in the same way. But it is like, yeah, she's fully Abigail to everyone around her, and like she is kind of more fixated on that she's trans than a lot of people in her life. Like we get the sense that she's being bullied and stuff. I didn't want to do that as like a story, so I like refer to it happening. But it feels like she's been at this school for a year, and like at the start it was hell, and now she's kind of just settled into a groove and is making out with a cute boy. And like that was like, I really was like, if she's not trans, this is just a story about like the punk girl who falls for the jock. Like that's just what the story is, and then her teacher's there for some reason. But yeah, like she's. I was interested in so many transition novels are about the process of I've come out and now I'm going to put on a dress and be beautiful and wonderful, and I didn't want to do that ever. I wanted to do the period between when you kind of come out to yourself and you're like, I'm going to do something about this, which can last for years. In my case, it lasted about half a year. And so Erica's trapped in that. And then there's a period 1 or 2 years in where you're suddenly like, wait, all my problems aren't solved? And that's Abigail is like, oh, I have all this other stuff I've never dealt with because the gender piece was so big. And now it's gotten out of the way a little bit. And I have to like think about these other things. And I don't enjoy doing that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, in that way, Abigail is very much the quintessential teenage girl.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I love teenage girls. That sounded so. I think teenage girls are fascinating.
Yes.
Everything I write, I mean, Yellow Jackets has so many teenage girls on it. The various pilots I've written have been about. I think that teenage girls have such a rich emotional experience of the world that then the world is uninterested in seeing. And like, the second you sort of add in, my senior year of high school, I fell in with this group of girls, one of whom knew I was trans, and everyone else didn't. But I just was suddenly like in a group of girls and had like functionally a girlfriend group in the way that like a cis girl might have. And it was the most wonderful thing in the world. And I knew how to do it instinctively and intuitively. And then it all went away. And I was like, people were like, well, you gotta hang out with boys, right? I was like, I guess. No offense to men. I think men are fun. But it was like this brief sort of moment that like has endlessly fascinated me. And so like I am interested in teenage girls, and also I thought there's something in coming out when you are an adult and suddenly there's a person 20, 30 years younger than you who knows more than you, and like they are technically your elder. And it was so interesting to me to make that a student-teacher thing, because there's so much concern about teachers corrupting students. And in this story, the student is the one who has more knowledge and is like telling Erica what's going to happen. I liked the idea of it being a mother-daughter story where they're both the mother and both the daughter, and I thought that was something fun to sort of play around with.
Yeah, and you also confront, because Erica in the book is 35, and she basically talks about how she never really got to have an adolescence as a woman.
Yeah.
As she never got to be the teenage girl that Abigail is being, and that's something that's very common for a lot of queer people.
Yeah, there's scenes where she's sort of trying to recapture that, but it's like she's kind of drafting off of what Abigail's doing. But I think one of the things that I think because she's a teacher, she can very easily see, oh, I'm kind of appropriating an experience that is not mine. But it is very like it is a very sad thing to come out as an adult and be like, oh, I didn't get to be a little girl. I didn't get to be a teenager. I didn't get to have a 20-something where I, fucked around and found out. Like, I came out in my 30s, and I had a wife, and I had a job, and I had to, like, keep doing these things, and I came out, and a teenage girl woke up in my brain and was like, let's party! And I was like, we have responsibilities to the world.
Yeah, I likewise came out at 34, so, like, just 5 years ago, and yeah. It's a strange element, and I thought you captured it very well.
It's alienating from yourself.
Yes.
And it's simultaneously very, it's like accepting a part of yourself, but it's also like realizing this thing you have to mourn. And I'm very interested in the melancholy of lives unlived, so, for some reason.
Gee. I wonder why. Let's see. I also have, you talk about Erica feels very alienated from her own body in a lot of ways throughout the book. And some of the ways you talk about, I just have like quotes that I highlighted here, is that her body had always seemed a minor inconvenience, a vessel to tote around her brain. If her body died someday, so be it. She would detach from it and float around looking for a new host. But now she longed for everything about it to be different. And that's something that, like, is the central, like, consternation that a lot of cis people have about trans people, is that we want to change our bodies, we seek ways to change them, and stuff. And I was wondering if you could speak to a little bit of how, like, you had the characters deal with that.
Having a body, I hope everyone in this room can agree with this, having a body is weird.
Yeah.
It is a strange thing to, especially as you age. And I do think like this starts much earlier than anybody wants to admit. You wake up one morning and something is sore and you're like, why is that sore? That seems weird.
Yeah, what happened?
There is a thing where your body will be like, I'm reminding you I'm here, and you're like, please stop doing that. I'm trying to live my life. And for trans people, for a lot of queer people, but for trans people especially, that is a constant throb. It is like a thing that becomes so all-pervasive that you either get so tuned into it that it's like all you can see, or you find a way to tune it out. And Erica has found a way to tune it out, and now she's like tuning on the radio dial and starting to get a sense of what it is. And every time she does, she's like, this body is awful. I hate it. It's not me. It doesn't feel right. I have had a lot of angst around my height. I'm 6'1", and I realized that my biological siblings are all as tall as me, including one of my sisters is taller than me, and they're cis people, and it was a weird trip for me to be like, if I had been a cis woman, I probably would have been over 6 feet. Would I have this same feeling about it? Maybe not. Or maybe I would still be like, I wish I was 5'2". I don't know. But it was like, but then you do hear about cis women who are very tall and are like, I wish I wasn't this tall. And like, we all have this relationship with our bodies, and trans people make it obvious in a way that I think threatens some people or frightens them or makes them like have to think about, here are things I don't like about myself. And we all have things we don't like about ourselves, but like, I think a lot about how often the message in stories is like, well, just make do with what you have. You know, every body swap story is like, I've realized that my life is better the way it was. And obviously, like, I don't think that people should stay in their magical body swap. If anybody here is dealing with that, please go wherever it started and get that reversed.
Go back to the goblet by the pond.
Yeah. But yeah, there's this undergirding assumption in a lot of stories about the body that to change it is a horror or something that must be undone. And transness is like, what if it's not? But also trans people love body horror. Like the Thing, The Fly, The Substance, all these movies that are gross and weird and horrible and are like, bodies are just sacks of meat, right? Like trans people love those. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah. It's Susan Stryker, the trans historian and theorist, has a sort of performance piece that she did, where she says, come see the seams and sutures that are in yourself.
Sure.
And stuff, by looking upon the quote unquote monstrous that is the trans body. And that's something that you're dealing with throughout the book.
I want to be clear, I'm very pretty. And yeah.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, let's see, did I cover? Yeah, I think, we're at 22, so we can do audience questions now.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to ask questions, great. I'm sure that someone will, are we supposed to call on you, I guess? That's probably what we're supposed to do.
Yeah.
All right here.
Hi.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you said something about writing teenagers. I was interested by writing specifically in this book, writing intergenerationally.
Sure.
Like this is, Abigail isn't just a teen girl, she's also a Gen Z teen girl.
Right.
There's a moment very early on where she's like in a super emotional situation and she says something really cruel, and then in her internal monologue she's like, was I too harsh on her? Let me know in the comments.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, that is, the exact sense of irony, detachment, memes. Anyway, how did you feel writing like her Gen Z perspective?
I felt very fortunate in that I wrote this book right before TikTok became a thing. This is set like in the immediate, and like TikTok is a phenomenon I don't know well. This is a world where people are, Abigail's using Reddit because that's where trans girls are hanging out, and she's also using YouTube and texting. And those are things I know well. One of the ways that I captured teen girl voices for this is I watched a lot of YouTube makeup tutorials, and it would just be like, okay, now we're gonna put on the mascara, and we're gonna go like that. What, mom? And like, the thing I realized was the method and the technology is different. And I think we think about teenagers in terms of technology because they're always early adapters. They're always using the new thing. But what, mom, is the most universal teenage experience ever. People were saying that in the Middle Ages. And I think, as someone who writes a lot of teenagers in a lot of different time periods, I think the emotional core of being a teenager is always the same. And then it's just a matter of like tuning into the voice. We get a lot of like on Yellow Jackets. We will get people be like, well, people didn't say this in the '90s, and A, who cares? But B, it is like to make teenagers feel real. You kind of have to tune into a modern vernacular, even if you're setting it in the past. But it is like a very interesting trick because Abigail also has to be like palatable enough to be a character in a novel that people want to keep reading. So like she's very abrasive, but hopefully in a fun way. Next question. There in the back.
Yeah. So you talked about how South Dakota is weird. It is. Mitchell's particularly weird.
Okay.
So the Corn Palace, the hot air balloon, Chef Louis with the cow outside. Did you find symbols in the location that you brought into the story with just kind of the general bizarreness that is Mitchell, South Dakota, the mansions next to trailer parks, all that fun stuff?
Yeah, I set it in Mitchell because I grew up in a town called Armour, which is named after the hot dog man, ARMOUR. And Mitchell was where we went for all our big events. We would go to the Corn Palace for big basketball games because inside the Corn Palace is a gym. People often don't know this, but it's just a big gym. And Mitchell was just like a place I knew really well, but it also, yeah, you're right, it's a very weird place because it kind of feels like it's the last thing on I-90 for a long time. It feels like the end of civilization. You go there and it's like, here's a super Walmart and a Culver's, and go on your way.
Next thing is Chamberlain.
Yeah, the next thing is Chamberlain. And so it felt to me like a good edge of the universe thing, but also yeah, it's there's a reference to when you drive from Mitchell to Sioux Falls, there's an enormous metal sculpture of a cow head, and I put that in there. It just is such an odd place, and such a it feels to me like people realizing how big the sky is and being like, I gotta put something here. This is unnerving me.
Yes.
It's gonna be a building that's decorated with corn, and you're like, okay, I guess. Yeah, it felt to me like you were reading a sci-fi story set on another planet where you're at the very edge, and out there is what we don't quite know what's there. So Mitchell served that end, but mostly it's just that I knew it really well, and there's a big corn building with a gym inside. Let's look over here for another question. Here in the front.
Hey, yeah, so not to spoil anything for people who haven't read this yet, but one of my favorite moments in the book is when about 2/3 of the way through we get a sharp perspective shift.
Sure.
I really love that as a device, and I'm interested what your influences were in doing that. What other books break the frame or other works of art in ways that influence how you did that chapter?
One of the books that most influences is Tamsin Ware's Hair of the Night, which is for people love the book Gideon the Ninth. Gideon the Ninth is an easy book to love. It's so fun. It's got so many pop culture references. And then Hair of the Ninth is written almost entirely in second person. And people are like, what the fuck is this? And I'm like, this is one of the best books that's ever been written. And I struggled with Gideon the Ninth because it wanted me to love it so badly. And when a book is like, Emily, stay away, I'm like, no. Come closer. I love you. And Harrow is written almost entirely in second person. It's you do this, you do that. And it struck me as such a strong conception of how trauma warps the brain that I was just blown away by it. And so I had that in the back of my brain as always. I was like, I want to do a similar big perspective shift. Another book that influenced me was All Things Gone Girl, where in the middle of Gone Girl, you just suddenly are in a different perspective, and it opens the whole book up. I really was like, I love when a TV show is and here's an episode about the supporting character, and we're just going to follow them around all day long and see what their life is like, and it gives you a new view on everything. And I really in every one of my books, I try to do that. I try to be I think that people are so fascinating and complicated, and I want everyone in this book, I want you to be able to imagine woodworking from every perspective and think this would be equally compelling. But yeah, I really wanted to have a moment where it feels like the book breaks wide open and you are looking at it from a new perspective and a new lens and a new angle. And it really felt to me because I was already doing third and first person, there was a necessary need to get out of that cycle and get to something else. So without spoiling it too much, though you can probably read between the lines about what's happening there. Next
That's
question.
my favorite chapter in the book.
Thank you.
It's so
Thank
good.
you. Right here.
Since you're a writer of so many mediums, how are you able to tell which medium will serve which story the best?
I don't. I honestly don't know. There's a thing I've been trying to make work in multiple formats for years now, and I finally have settled on. I think it's a novel, but also it kind of wants to be a TV show. But also, I probably couldn't sell it as a TV show, so I'm going to do it as a novel. But it is like, I think that any story can be told in any medium, but also like there are things woodworking does that you can only do in a book. Specifically shifting in voice from first to third. The dead name of Erica, if we did that on screen, we'd have to like bleep it or something. It would not be as powerful, I think. But there would be virtues to doing a TV version of woodworking, like you'd have actors there. You know, having actors saves you a lot of time, I gotta say. Because you'll write on the page, "Hi, Shauna," and then someone will be like, "Hi, Shauna." And you're like, "Yes, right, there you go." In a book, you don't have that. But I think a lot about, I did this podcast called Arden, which was a scripted fiction podcast, and it's a fake true crime show, and we occasionally would get offers to adapt it for TV, and we would be like, well, then you're just making a crime drama. Like, why are you doing that? In that case, like, the medium was the message, not being able to see things was the message, and I think there's a similar thing going on in woodworking, but, like, there's some stuff where I'm just like, I think that books that have a really rich internal journey for the characters are what I like to see, and often are very hard to adapt to screen. So, but for a screen story, I'm often looking for something that's very external, very propulsive, even if it's like a smaller, the pilot that my wife and I wrote that got us the job on Yellow Jackets is a functionally a small story, but like it is not as internal as like a book would be. It's like, here's a teen girl. But yeah, that's I think that it is just, it's a gut check at all times, but I often skew toward if it's got a little bit more of that interiority, then it's a book, and if it's a little bit more like, now we're gonna fight somebody, it's a movie. Yeah. Anybody else? Right here.
It's not about your book, it's more about what you guys were talking about earlier.
Sure.
What you said about woodworking stood out to me. Do you think your perspective on woodworking from the other side has shifted? Like when you were saying, when I'm a mom, people think of me as a mom.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever think about what woodworking is for you in that moment?
Yeah, I think I think in that moment I'm effectively woodworking. You know,
Yeah.
if I go to Target and we're just like, people are just, or the park is actually a really good example, because there's a lot of other moms there, and the kids are playing, and we're all just talking, and it's like, they are just seeing me as a mom and approaching me as a mom, and if they like read that I'm trans, it's the 6th or 7th thing they see. And like, so by then they've already gone so far down the mom bucket that they're like, this is just a mom. And I won't lie, that is like, there's something nice about that. There's something nice about not having to be myself all the time. But at the same time, I'm aware of the ways in which like being my kid's mom is ultimately, I'm defined by my relationship to them, which is a relationship with parenthood that I think all people who are parents have, is like, suddenly I'm just this kid's parent. And it is like, you know, when my kid falls over or something at the park, then I have to go deal with it. And that becomes like, to a certain degree, I am woodworking away from myself in that moment. So it is like a weird thing, because we're all, like I said, we're all doing this naturally, but also like when you stop and think about it, I have other things I like to do. I like to write novels. I'm not just a mom. But to my kid has no idea. My kid's like, she's the one who gives me snacks. And like that, so yeah, and it is like, I think one of the things I talk about in the book is that like when you come out as trans, other people who know you have gotten so used to relying on you in this certain way that they will be like, no, that's not who you are. I know you as this person. And it is like the trick of when you're a parent and have a kid grow up, and your kid's like, the classic, but Dad, I don't want to play football, I want to make art. Like, and then the dad's like, you're gonna play football. Like, that's just that. It's just like, I can't let go of this idea I have of you that transness externalizes. But yes, I am my kid's mom. That's the end of that story. There in the back.
Yeah, so You're a fantastic short form writer. I subscribe to episodes, everybody should.
Thank you.
But I'm wondering, as a writer, the transition from doing short form to long form, the rhythm is so different. How do you do both at the same time?
I think in television seasons, my brain is just wired to do that. If you got me drunk enough, I would tell you where the end of every episode of the 10-episode limited series adaptation of Woodworking is in this book, because I know. But I think that I don't know. I think one of the things I've been telling people is like I've taught myself to write journalism and criticism in a way I never had to teach myself to write fiction. I moved to California to write for television, and I accidentally started a 20-year-long side quest in being a TV critic. And like it was very nice, and I love writing that criticism, but like I really had to teach myself how to do it in a way that like writing fiction has come naturally to me. This is not just my first novel, it's the first time I've ever attempted to write a novel. Like I sat down, and I don't want to say it was easy because it wasn't, but it was like I was writing in a language my initial language. Like it was like I was writing in my a thing that I just knew how to do. And obviously there were many drafts, and there was a lot of work, and there was a lot of revision, but it feels to me like I naturally come up with big ideas. Like there's a reason I write for TV and not movies. I have movie ideas, I've pitched them before, but like I like ideas where it seems like the world of this is bigger than what you already see, and that seems to fit this format. But yeah, there was a learning curve there, especially like with making sure that like people got inside the heads of the characters. That was the thing I really had to teach myself, because I thought when I turned in a draft to an editor and was like, there's 5 instances of interiority here, because you didn't spot them. And she was like, you can do more than that. I was like, no. So that was about it, yeah. Right there.
Hi. First of all, I grew up in Rapid City, so I'm really sorry you're from Eastover. Second of all, I wonder if you could say a little bit more about that process of going through publishing. I mean, it's cool to hear that writing fiction felt more natural, but when you talk about like even getting to pick the font or not, or like how did it feel different to like the protracted process of like putting together a book?
It was so annoying. It was so annoying. I'm so used to this gentleman here was talking about reading my newsletter. And I write one of those things, and it's out the next morning, and like people are like, "Hey, I thought that was great," and I'm like, "Thank you for the instant dopamine boost." This book I sold in 2023. I started writing it in 2020. It's coming out yesterday, and it was so long, and I was just sitting there and like thinking, and like the weirdest part was when we had it locked. And then it was like 6 months of like me not thinking about the book at all. And then my publicist was like, let's start thinking about woodworking again and what we're gonna do. And I was like, I think I remember that book. Did I write it? Was it some other Emily St. James? So that was like the weirdest thing. It was like shifting to that level of time. But like, I still don't understand how publishing works, and I refuse to find out. I think people who work in publishing don't know how publishing works. And they'll be like, so do we think the book's gonna be a success? And they'll be like, we might know in like 6 months. And you're like, okay. But yeah, it was biggest thing I had to adjust to was just the scale of time we were working on, where someone would give me a deadline and they would be like, it's in January, and it was like June, and I would like get there and it would be like, I need a couple more weeks. And they'd be like, that's fine, absolutely, you can do that. And you can't do that in online journalism at all. Even if your deadline is only set by yourself, you have to like buckle down and get it done. And it's very weird to now be getting people saying they like this book when I kind of emotionally let go of it like a year ago, you know?
Yeah, there's usually like a good 18 months between when I finish a book and it actually comes out, which is a long time.
Yeah, I've sold a second book. We're signing the contracts on, and I intentionally was like, I want this to come out in 2026 because I wanted to like compress that a little bit. So I have to write a novel now.
Yeah, and I was gonna say with that, like in my third book where I talk about being non-binary and stuff, when I was writing that book, I hadn't decided whether or not I wanted to get top surgery yet. And by the time the book came out, I'd gotten top surgery. So, like, that's how long publishing.
When I started writing Woodworking, I was like, I don't know if I want to have kids. And then the process of working on, and several other things.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah, I guess I should maybe try this. And now, you know, she's great, but also she's around all the time.
Yeah, she's 2 now.
She's 2. Oh. I miss her dearly, but also I'm so glad I'm here right now. Another question.
I think we have time for one more.
Time for one more.
No, I'm
Oh.
on it.
Right here.
So I haven't started reading the book. I just bought it when it came into the shop here. But just so many of the full quotes, like the blurbs, and even just kind of paging through it, just like it's a like humor is very much present in the book and the story and your writing. I was just kind of wondering, like, how was that like a conscious decision when you were writing it to just like make it kind of like a humorous story, or like because I know like from your writing I've read before, like in Fox, like that's kind of a thing that's part of your writing, like consistently is just having that humorous tone. So I was just kind of wondering how that like worked into the process of writing the story.
Yeah, I think
like
that.
wise.
Yeah, I think that I naturally like to deflect with humor. I think that both in, I've been talking all night and being like, they haven't laughed yet, they haven't laughed yet, they haven't laughed yet. And then I'll be like, and then one time I fell over, and you're like, so I just naturally do that in my writing and in my speaking. It's, I think, probably a defense mechanism I learned in my youth, as so many of us do. But it was really important to me that this book not be, when you hear this is a book about a trans woman who came out and is going to transition, that you get in your brain an idea of what that is. And it's going to be like, she stared at the flowers longingly and thought of how it would feel to have one of them drifting around her waist as a skirt. And you're already just like, I want to find a book where like people fight. And the transition journey is internal, and humor is a way to keep that moving along. And it was really important to me that this book be fun to read. I didn't want you to like feel like you were eating your vegetables. I feel like so often stories from marginalized communities, even if they're really fucking great books, are like, I remember I read Nevada by Imogen Benny, which I think is the best trans novel ever written, and it's also similarly like very funny and like scabrous. But it was handed to me as like, this is the trans novel. You need to read this now that you are trans. And like, I read it and was like, this is a much better book than it was sold to me as. And like, I am aware that especially at this point in time, this book is going to be handed to people as like, this book is about being trans. You need to know all of these things. And I wanted to have that same experience where you read it and you're like, oh, this is a good book. This is fun. This is making me laugh. This has plot turns. This has like a story. It has character arcs. I'm not a writer who is interested. I don't think I could write like really close literary. I'm very much in one point of view, and I'm thinking, I love reading that stuff. Ducks Newburyport is one of my favorite books ever written, but I could not write that book. I could not do that. And so I just wanted to write a book that sounded like me, and I wanted to write a book that if that lady in the airport picked it up and read it on the plane, she'd be like, I laughed a couple times, so I guess it was worth the $20 or whatever she pays. You know? So, but yeah, it felt important to me to have it be a fun read, and jokes were a good way to do that.
Sweet. Well, I just have one last closing question. And I know at this time the sort of closings are like, have been a lot of like, what hope can we have in this political moment and stuff? But I've been listening to a lot of Kendrick Lamar lately.
Sure.
And so I'm wondering, how do you think we can be better haters?
I am by my nature not a hater. If you've read my criticism, you know this is true. I think that there is a certain fuck you energy in living well, in living a life that is uncompromised and is joyful and is powerful and is standing in front of someone and saying, no, this is who I am. And like, there is this idea of like, transness is living your life for yourself and not for anybody else. And like, people are going to hate that regardless. So you may as well do it. But also, you know, we are dealing with people who are tremendously thin-skinned, have tremendously small egos that are trod on easily. Like saying, "You seem like you kind of suck," will make them be like, "I do not suck, and I'm going to ban you from all social media platforms." We don't have to be better haters. We just have to speak accurately about these people and what they're doing, because they're so. Not only are they awful, they're so small and so petty and so uninterested in what's wonderful about being human and what's natural about being human and what's so good about loving other people. So the best hate that we can bring is to just live our best lives and then occasionally be like, "Hey, you suck." And they'll be like, "How dare you?"
And that is why I flip off every Cybertruck I see. All right. Thank you all for that. We will be at the table out front here.
Thank you.